That's exciting. I like that. Okay. My colleagues know me from being the founder of the Black Experience in Cannabis, which was the first plenary session on cannabis in the 2018 Congressional Black Caucus, and from there produced over 50 events focusing around the education in cannabis. However, today is not about me. I am so excited to bring together some wonderful, just not as people, but experts in what they do, and in terms of making way for other people and education around policy, change, diversity, equity, inclusion, and of course the knowledge from every part of the marijuana to cannabis industry. So with this, I will give each speaker just to briefly introduce yourself, because please follow them, take a picture, follow them on LinkedIn, get their contact, and you can engage with them and read about them on a deeper level. But the panel today is not just to talk about, and I do this and I do that, but to actually get into the grit of what the focus is for this particular panel, which is around the issues of past failures, future opportunities, and developing effective cannabis policy for change. So this is about cannabis and policy. So I'll start with Ms. Shanita.
Good morning, everyone. Shanita Penny. Brief introduction is that I am a justice-impacted individual who got into the cannabis space to ensure that people that look like me have access to this medicine if they choose, that their records are expunged, their lives are made whole as we legalize cannabis throughout this country. And for those of us that do want to explore this industry as an economic opportunity, that access is available to us as well. I led the Minority Cannabis Business Association for 3 years, where we impacted social equity policy throughout the country. We have a lot of course correction to do, and I think we're going to get into that today.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Tahir Johnson. I am the CEO of Simply Pure Trenton. We're an adult use cannabis company in Trenton, New Jersey. Currently with a dispensary about to open and a recent cultivation license. Following in this lady's footsteps, I'm the current president of the Minority Cannabis Business Association. I came from a background in finance. Really, when I saw the opportunity for there are people who need to be involved in this multi-billion-dollar industry to be able to create wealth. And so I've been working as an advocate and a business owner to further those goals.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Christian Soltis. I am a competition and antitrust counsel by trade. I currently advise Law Lawyers International on competition and commercial issues in North America as a senior counsel and director. Prior to that, I spent almost a decade working in a private law firm, counseling clients and litigating high-stakes cases in antitrust, especially nascent industries such as cannabis and payments issues. Ecstatic to be here. I think the lens that I'm going to provide and where I focus on is on the economics of this, specifically the competitive choices that we make when we formulate policy by state and also federally, and also kind of look at the competitive dynamics of what is occurring in various states based on how they rolled out cannabis policy. Nowhere is this closer to my heart than in New York, which is an excellent case study in kind of lessons that can be learned. New York was a state that really focused on social equity issues as a way to actually increase competition and to ensure that benefits of this huge industry, $1 trillion industry over the next few years, actually inures back to the people that were discriminated against 100 years now, I guess, if you're doing the math. And so just simple economics, when you're thinking, looking at the graph that was up there earlier, unless you take social equity issues and make it a priority as you're formulating the policy and revisiting that policy once it's already in practice, because you're not going to get it right the first time. But you have to make sure that social equity is prioritized, otherwise the economic fruits of this industry is going to inure back to the incumbents. It's that blue, the big blue chunk there. Without some external force acting upon it, it cannot possibly just correct itself. It's an economic thing. So that's what I really focus on, and I'm sure it resonates with everyone here who's dealt with these actual competitive shortfalls, whether it's access to capital, whether it's competing against the black market, whether it's making sure that supply is equaling the demand in terms of what you purchase, and if not, like how much can you kind of rest on the capital that you're working with when you don't have access to constant internet, 100% of the industry's doing this. So, looking forward to it.
Hi everyone, I'm Sarita Wright. I'm the Fractional Chief Marketing Officer for Maker House. Maker House has a portfolio of cannabis brands that are sold throughout licensed retailers in California. I also served as a marketing consultant. Prior to my work, I worked with Black Enterprise, building up their social media platforms. Some of you have probably seen at many a conference over the years. And I got into cannabis for media representation and how we are perceived in the media, as well as the stories that we are telling and the narratives that are being pushed toward Black and brown people respectively in media. So that's the lens that I operate out of. It is very, very important to what Chris just said about getting folding in our social equity and social justice in the beginning. Often we are building the plane while we're flying it, and trying to come back and course correct a lot of things has been a really hard hurdle, but we continue to press on. So I'm really glad to see all of your faces, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
This is exciting for us to be together because it's been some time, probably since before the pandemic. Yeah. So I'm going to just dive right in. Some of the style of this panel, I will ask some questions direct, and then I will ask some questions where you feel like you have the answer, like I'll address that. And also because we want to stay within our time frame, just not to go off on a tangent so far where we can't get to all other good questions. So I'm going to start off with a question, and I'm going to start with Ms. Shanika Penny. What are some notable failures or shortcomings in past cannabis policies, and how have they impacted individuals and communities?
I think everybody's familiar with the fact that we are legalizing cannabis at the state level throughout this country, and that is still illegal at the federal level. That is the biggest challenge that we have today. For everything that we're getting right in the states, we don't have the support of the federal government. For everything that we are getting wrong at the state and local level, we don't have support and resources from the federal government. We also have a Congress that's made up of folks who are ideologically opposed to this, and their constituents are in need of them supporting these industries that employ 500,000 people today. And we're expected to see that number continue to grow, especially in 2024, according to the data that's been reported. So right now, what we've done well at the state level is actually say we're not going to wait on the federal government. We're going to figure out what it is that our communities need, what our regulated businesses need, and we are going to push forward. We have great examples from the state that we need to make sure that our lawmakers in DC know about. The biggest issue that I have with the way we have approached this is that we have not put people first. Regardless of whether we have a regulatory framework in place, we can make people whole that were impacted by the criminalization of cannabis. And that to me is the biggest shortcoming of all.
Thank you very much. Would anybody else like to get in on that? Okay.
I would.
Good, because I was going to ask you a question next, so go ahead.
Perfect, maybe I'll answer. No, I think that's absolutely right, and the biggest issue is the lack of action on the federal level. And I agree that, you can't just wait, you still have to have these conversations on a state-by-state basis, learn from what other states have done, and keep moving forward, especially on the social equity front, see what other states have done right and wrong. But the access to or a change at the federal level is going to be the big thing that allows cost of capital to go down for people in the industry. That you treat it the same way as anybody else, any other business from a tax basis, which is not happening right now, which is crazy and putting a lot of people under. Just really quickly on the state perspective, it's really also difficult because New York, had very good intention from a social equity perspective about making sure that, for example, 40% of revenue has to go to communities that were disproportionately impacted historically, and then it's also, there's several other things, but there was a first tranche of applicants in New York, and it was only open to people who have had negative experiences and have been impacted legally by the justice system, and that was something that we applauded. I think all of us really loved it. And then what happened is a lot of people who got that, winning lottery ticket and got a license and started investing, taking out loans and doing all the other things at very high rates because, again, cost of capital is expensive. They were left on the hook because a bunch of lawsuits got filed to combat the social equity perspective under the guise of discrimination, discriminating against the big blue chunk over there. And that halted the licensing and the movement of legal cannabis. So now all the people that this was supposed to help are now stuck without product, without the ability to sell, having to pay back loans, leases, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it just adds. And so unless you're well-equipped and rich, it's becoming very difficult to actually stay on course. Meanwhile, I live in Brooklyn. There are 2,000 illegal cannabis shops, like probably on my block, and it is. While you want to see cannabis expand, I personally do. I want it to be done the right way, because kind of putting people with good intention into this situation that there's no win. Like I said, building the plane where you're flying it. You want to make sure you're not actually screwing them and you want to make sure you put them on a level playing field so they can compete against the legal market, let alone other legal industries. So that's my opinion on that.
Well, that's good because that leads into a question about diverse backgrounds, and anybody can answer this. Is how can stakeholders from diverse backgrounds and perspectives be engaged in the policy-making process to ensure that the resulting regulations are inclusive and reflective of community needs?
Yes. I think the key word that I picked up and that I definitely believe in is community. I think you have to tackle this from all sides. You need people, scientists, health educators, law enforcement, advocates. Everyone really does need to be at this table having these discussions. People who have had medical experiences or really use cannabis for very specific reasons. People who just use it recreationally to decompress. You need all of these people at the table having this conversation because it impacts our lives in so many different ways, whether you engage with the plant or whether you don't. And I think what tends to happen, or at least with my experience when I was also in Brooklyn, we tend to be, in these rooms very early on, and then somehow, some way, things get lost in translation, and all of these great ideas that we had on the forefront, they seem to get kind of lost. And I've seen people like Shamita
go even deeper and dive further into these spaces. And that's the other thing. How can we really be a part of it? And it's about coming out to these events. It's also about getting more actual awareness out so that people know that these things are happening in their community and that their voice can actually be heard. But you have to have diverse communities, period, for this conversation to really take root and be intentional about it.
Thank you very much. To hear, what are the potential economic opportunities associated with cannabis legalization, and how can policy be crafted to maximize these benefits while mitigating potential risks? And elaborate on what are those risks. And I'm asking you this because you are an owner in the space.
Yeah. So for one, I think when we look at the economic opportunity, cannabis was an industry in the United States that made, I believe it was like almost 30 billion last year. So when you look at, and African Americans have less than 2% ownership. So when you look at, on the other side of that, African Americans are almost 4 times as likely to be arrested for cannabis. The fact that we don't have a part of this industry doesn't make any sense. Why is that? Because of all the challenges that a lot of my peers have talked about, right? The fact that this is federally illegal means that there's no access to loans, there's no access to small business programs, there's no access to any types of support. And many times you're looking at a highly competitive industry where there's limited licenses, limited opportunities, and you're competing against multi-state, well-funded, publicly traded companies. So it's a David and Goliath scenario that makes it extremely difficult. And like you said, you do have to be well-funded to compete and be able to play the game. And where we look at the challenges, I love the presentation before us because he talked about, for one, just the wealth gap that already exists, right? So if you imagine a business, so far for me to open my dispensary, it's costed me, between the real estate and the business, almost $3 million. So when you look at being able to do that without being able to get a loan, access to capital, all those types of things, how do you do it? Especially when we already have limited access to venture capital, private equity, no personal wealth. It's an extreme challenge. I think one of the other things when you look at, we've heard about New York, right? New Jersey, a lot of these states have had, good intentions to try to have people get into the business. But,
New Jersey, for example, we had our recreational market opened up in April 2022, and those companies that transitioned over were those companies that had the medical licenses first. And here we are 2 years in. At the last meeting, a question was asked, like, how many black-owned businesses are actually open in New Jersey? And they couldn't give a straight answer, right? Like, and now they're saying the industry is going to make $1 billion in New Jersey in 2024, right? And so I think some of the other things I found is that the barriers that we typically talk and know about, of course, the cost of the license, but again, also, there's different challenges in real estate acquisition, real estate development, all those things that just compact the greater problem. So one of the greatest things that we can do is, be educated. I love what Sarita said before about how we have to, for one, I think when we look at the wealth opportunity, how do we harness black wealth to even take advantage of this opportunity, right? This is a once-in-a-lifetime thing. Cannabis is going to get legalized one time. As a matter of fact, when it comes through your state, it's going to, like that, the opportunity, that first mover advantage to build that wealth, to take advantage of that is going to happen one time. So I think that as black folks, we have an opportunity to mobilize to go after it, but I also understand the stigma that's been there with it as well, right? Like, I've personally been arrested for cannabis myself 3 times. But was still able to make it in finance. So even when I was working at Morgan Stanley and I saw cannabis become legalized, it was the last thing on my mind because I'm the only one of my family to go to college, do all this stuff, and made it hard to get into finance. So I understand, I even understand the hesitancy from a lot of our people to get into it, but we need the people with the smartest minds in media to come, like Sarita, to be a part of it. We need the smartest minds in policy, like Shanita, to be in it. We need people from finance and business and media and marketing and every technology, like every lane, even if it's not just traditional plant touching, because that's the other opportunity, right? Because where we have these challenges with the plant touching businesses, if you're doing ancillary businesses, you don't have those same challenges for funding, fundraising, and there's an opportunity to build a business there. So I think that those are some of the ways that we can get involved as well.
That's a profound answer, and there's so many things to pull from that. When we, look at the overall title of this panel about past failures, Shanita, I want to ask you, how might federal legalization of cannabis impact existing state-level cannabis programs and regulations, and what challenges might arise in harmonizing federal and state laws?
Well, right now, the patchwork of state laws it's a situation that is not sustainable. What we need from a federal framework and federal legalization is to allow the states to do what they need to do in their states. So where you've had a state legalize cannabis and, create an industry and also give back, the first state that comes to mind for me is Illinois. So I think about the fact that they wrote into the law that a third of the tax revenue will go back into communities. And every single year, I see those grant opportunities come up, and I see community organizations that we all know, love, depend on, have worked on, built, taking advantage of those tax dollars to do the work that we need done in our community. What we don't want to see from federal policy is to undo what is working. What we want to do is be treated like every other industry and every other company. We want to be able to have bankruptcy protection in the event that things don't work out. Not being great at business should not put you in the poorhouse. And we have those protections for every other entrepreneur and business entity that exists today except cannabis. And so when I think about some of the federal policy that's been put forth, and I'll go all the way back to the MORE Act, right? And then we had the CAOA introduced a few years ago. Those were, comprehensive bills that didn't have a regulatory framework in place to truly protect the industry. And I'm not just talking about protecting businesses. I'm also talking about protecting communities. There's no way that we can trust the cannabis products that are available to most people today because there's not oversight from the federal government to make sure that what the states are allowing are safe products. There's no federal age gating, right? States are doing a pretty good job of it. You go to these websites, you go into these dispensaries, you're asked for ID. So we're keeping these regulated products out of the hands of youth, but we need to go a step further and ensure that where you have 2,000 unregulated businesses, that they are not the first option for patients and consumers in this country. Most recently we saw the States Act introduced. We saw it introduced by a Republican. And so a lot of people turn their nose up. Oh, we don't want that. There are no social equity provisions. And I'm not going to pretend that there are. But what exists is a framework that allows us to lean on the Small Business Administration, which is something that we should be doing to support small, minority, and social equity operators in every state. Right now, we don't have a real mechanism in place to hold accountable companies that say, oh, we're going to hire diverse talent. We're going to give back to our community. We're going to do the right things. We don't have a mechanism in place. We can't enforce the laws in New York right now, right? We don't have the support and resources afforded to any other industry. And I think it's time for us to stop looking at who's introducing legislation and really dig into what it is. Don't be so quick to say, oh, that didn't come from the person I like. Get involved anyway and be in that room telling them why this policy doesn't go far enough or why it intentionally harms a community that they may or may not have said that they want to repair and make whole again. So when I think about what influences my policy advocacy, it is me being justice impacted. It's having navigated the Pennsylvania market with no social equity program, with a handful of those folks that have that big blue part of the chart that we saw earlier. So I was able to see what it took for the most equipped, well-funded, resourced, politically connected folks to make it go in this industry. And to then sell that business so that I would have capital available to me for the next iteration of investment or founding a company. So it's important that when we think about what federal policy looks like, again, we are looking to support what's working well, and we're looking for resources and a way to fix what's not working well. But we couldn't be here today if it weren't for folks like some of you sitting in this room and certainly sitting here, taking a chance and saying, hey, I don't know where we're going, but we're going, and we'll fix it when we get there.
Very, very true. In light of the 2024 as being an election year, some of the things that Biden's administration said in the beginning and where we are now. Christian, what are the potential implications of the Biden administration's stance on cannabis legalization, particularly in light of conflicting state and federal laws?
Sure, and I'll just let everyone know that after I answer this, I'll politely excuse myself since I have to leave. But you know, I think very quickly it's, as we all know, politicians make promises and don't deliver on them. But I think it's also a little deeper than that, because there is bipartisan support, more or less, for legalization on a federal level, and even beyond, you know, taking it back from that, for certain changes in scheduling. For example, Schedule 1 to Schedule 3 is another option. Certainly with the SAFER Act, which is, you know, doesn't solve everything, and it doesn't really have social equity teeth, but at least it allows those who need it the most to get capital at a competitive rate. That said, I think the biggest hurdle is that it's just not a priority for a lot of people in Congress. So when you have a kind of like a, you know, even if we agree, we're not going to agree because of the optics and it's an election year and we're just not going to come together. Or even if we do come together, what we've seen is, even if it's bipartisan, you know, the leaders of the party will shut it down or refuse to let it go to a vote or whatever it is. I think that's the biggest issue right now, is just not coming to an agreement, even though we agree. And, you know, the SAFER Act, you know, it doesn't solve everything, but it is a big step forward that'll help a lot of people, and it's not mutually exclusive with social equity issues either. So it's you know, it's tough to come to full agreement, especially when it's not a priority. I think lobbying, advocacy has to happen, and it has to happen on a pretty consistent, publicized basis, right? I think the saying is, dripping water hollows out stone, not through force, but through persistence, and that's very true. You know, you're not going to win these big battles, but, you know, every single day that you're on the Hill, every single day that you're networking with each other, and from friends, I've heard that actually was going great before COVID, and COVID had a chilling effect on a lot of networking, and all of a sudden you have different organizations, pro-cannabis, pro-legalization organizations that aren't necessarily on the same page, which makes lobbying so difficult, especially when you don't have the money. And so I think those are some kind of practical ways to go through, but, you know, community, it's stick together. Something happens and you need access to funds. There should be a black sponsored fund that can help people who are kind of in that situation, so that, again, those who suffer from kind of building the plane as you're flying it, still have a chance to compete from a level playing field.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you for your time with us.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. I joined this last year and was very excited to do so, and I realized that it's caused a lot of conversations coming out of it too, not just at the summit, and I think the same thing will happen this year. So, thank you.
Thank you. Sarita, I would like to ask you a question because of your plethora of knowledge in media. One of the important, I guess, core things in communication is we get the word out through media. And of course, there's many media outlets, but how things are perceived, how it is being delivered, who are the audiences, and what are their perceptions and information and education that they're coming to the table with. Let me ask you, so many things I can ask you. How do media representations of cannabis intersect with broader conversations about race, class, and social justice?
That's deep. That is a deep question. Cannabis has been a part of my lifestyle. For many of you, may just be a part of your lifestyle. And so that alone, just when you know about the different ways that you can use the plant, the things that you can make from the plant, it opens up so many possibilities and so many intersections start really showing up. And that's really how I think about storytelling. And that's how I think about when I look at TV shows. Shanita and I were talking earlier. She had brought up the Cosby Show episode with the joint in the book. I was talking about watching the Kardashians, my guilty pleasure, and Chris is in Palm Springs buying CBD. Kim's having a baby shower, and they're going to have a sound bath in CBD. And, even now with psychedelics, you see all of these very happy stories of mostly, white women just out enjoying living their lives with what for us was just war on drugs and those drugs and so that's one thing that I look at. Who's telling these stories? Why don't we have beat reporters at every major newspaper? I mean, I was at Black Enterprise talking about this since 2015, 16. Where are the people who are just in the local communities telling the local stories? Because there's a local community story everywhere about this plant. There are fun and entertaining stories because, I can't lie and say that I have never gotten high and just had the time of my life, watching a movie, right? Or enjoying a delicious meal when that edible hits and I'm like, oh my God, is it just me? Or I think this pasta is just fantastic. But this is just everyday life. So these are so many different ways that we can share the stories, but again, who has the access to the capital to share these stories? Who gets the opportunities to share these stories when these stories are being produced and thought of, whether it's an editorial piece or a piece of content that's shared on social media for a brand? Is it inclusive? Because everybody uses this plant. And you want everyone to, use your products, withstanding certain things, right? So I think about it from so many different lenses because it intersects just in my life period. I think about, the war on drugs and the frying pan with the eggs and this is your brain and, the billions of dollars that was sent to reinforce this message. And then I realized, I was like, well, what drugs were they really talking about? Was it just all of them? Because it was just, that's it. There was no other context around it, but that's what stuck with so many of us. Yeah. That's what stuck with so many of us. And so when we think about media and even policy, how does that relate to the policy around what we can air, the stories that we can tell? What about really impactful educational awareness campaigns? Also campaigns that are just focused on compliance so that people understand what is actually happening with cultivation or distribution. Also campaigns that just empower the community so that they can make informed decisions. It hits us in so many areas and I don't think that we really consider it. We often think about, Snoop Dogg and Wiz Khalifa, Redman and Method Man. I think about a few episodes of Insecure that I've seen. And some of those episodes were triggering, like, the one where they were like out at the
Coachella or something, and it's like we just doing all these drugs. It's just absolute pandemonium. That's not everybody's life. That, you know, some people have that experience, but what was the message that was sending at the end of the day? And so you also want to think about that when you are in, say, a writer's room, or you want to include cannabis content in some way. Maybe we should get an advocate in here or someone from the community that can help to tell this story, or even thinking about product placement, because you see that as well. You know, you see a Pepsi can, you see certain brands. How do we make sure that is inclusive and small craft brands are involved in these conversations and in that room? Well, if you don't have, you know, diverse hiring at some of these top companies, these big marketing agencies, you won't have that. If we don't have the support, you know, people won't know. Well, let's go see if we can post up into his dispensary and shoot a scene. These are the things that we should be thinking about. And again, this plant intersects everywhere in our lives. You can eat with it, you can rub it on you, you don't have to get high, you can get high, you can make a car, you can build a house. I mean, I've just been blown away at all of the things that you can do with this plant. It is absolutely, you know,
No limit.
there's no limit. And so thinking about that, think about the ways that we can tell more stories, but also making sure that we are educating people at a higher level, because we have a lot of things that we need to undo.
Yeah, the work, as when we were talking before we started, you know, we got just kind of like went into other lanes or a little discouraged, but the work is ongoing. And I mean, this question I was thinking about.
Before you go
ahead.
I just
Absolutely.
want to say one thing to tie it back to policy. The face of cannabis policy reform has changed over the years. In California, the face of weed, cannabis legalization, marijuana reform were AIDS patients. Right? The HIV/AIDS epidemic was running rampant, and California led this country in saying, hey, there is something here that helps these folks. Unfortunately, at the time, all we knew were that it would comfort you in your last days, that it might help you if you don't have an appetite. But what we know now, because again, that phase changed, and now we were looking at pediatric the seizure patients. Epilepsy, thank you. And that is what got people going across this country and saying, oh, we got to do something about this. You had the governor of Georgia, who still has one of the most limited cannabis programs in the country, willing to go across state lines to get medication to bring back to these pediatric patients. But let me tell you something, they didn't look like our kids. No. Okay, so now you've got Congresswoman Barbara Lee, one of my favorite champions for cannabis, who talks about her mother having knee replacement and this cream being a lifesaver. And she is in various rooms talking about cannabis policy reform with a very personal story. So the storytelling is important, but I think that there has to be the additional context. One of the most important things that we need the media to help get out is the fact that cannabis is still federally illegal.
Yep.
You change laws in a state and people go crazy. They're smoking here, they're buying from it, they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
And so while it's great that we look good and we're placing our products, we need to be using this in a productive way. I don't care about you getting high. I don't care about you having a good time. What I care about is that you understand the position that you might be putting yourself in, thinking that you're doing something that is legal, thinking that you have access to a legal product and it's never been tested. You don't know where you're getting it from. So that's where I want us to evolve as it relates to it being more normalized right now. Because we are normalizing it, but there are still people being left behind and miseducated.
That was really, really deep. Now you are making me dig for.
Well, I'm cooking now.
I have a reform section. I have an equity section. I have a media section. We do have about 10 to 12 minutes left. I do want to ask to hear, and everybody, you know, we can all get in, but again, because you're in the ownership space, what role can cannabis revenue allocation play in addressing social and economic disparities, such as funding education, job training, and community development programs? Now, I'm saying this because I know that, and we said this before we got up here, the glamorization around thinking that people who own a dispensary are super, super rich.
Yeah.
And then, but especially for people, black people, not people of color, black people. But if you're looking at white people who have the resources and they have the $1 million investment and they can, go the full gamut with this, they play the social equity game.
Yeah.
And then in different states, well, they'll get a license and they'll do a little bit, then they'll sell it, so they don't have to do the social equity piece. There's so many little things. But for you in this space, how do you see your social corporate responsibility at some point? What are you going to invest in, and how are you? I know you will, but how is that going to look?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll start, thank you for that. I'd love to talk about what I'm doing around that and the policy around it. One thing, like you said, is interesting because social equity looks different in different places, right? So it's not always consistent. Right next door in Maryland, social equity was based on zip codes. And, some of those zip codes, people, I don't know how they social equity, right? Or if you went to a certain college, right, you could be social equity. So some of the people that are going to get to take advantage of this, I promise you, are not our folks that you're thinking of. So I'll start with that. So I think whether you are a social equity like licensee or a big company, small company, whatever, we all have a responsibility to give back, again, just because of what cannabis has done to our communities and our people this entire time. And so I think the opportunity, the economic restorative justice opportunity looks a couple different ways. One of them, like Shanita already talked about, is the tax revenue that gets made from cannabis and where it goes. In New Jersey, similar to, like she said, in Illinois, it goes back to community organizations, but it also goes to schools. It goes to one of the amazing things, like I talked about, the challenges of access to capital. They're taking that tax revenue in New Jersey. They created a grant fund. So they gave out $250,000 grants, and they just gave out another $150,000 grants, and I was able to get one. So they were able to take that tax revenue and put it back to help invest entrepreneurs, and I think that's a great thing. The other part is when you look at it just from a structural standpoint, the town where we do business also gets 2% of the tax revenue. So that money gets to go back to all the different things you could imagine in the town. Whether it's education, fixing the roads, all those types of things. One of the important points, I'll say my personal preference when you think of the tax revenue, right? Another big conversation is, should money from cannabis be going to fund the police that spend all this money locking you up? I don't think so. So again, that's another conversation where we need to be involved and be thoughtful of the conversation of where this money's going to go. Because we're talking about if they're taxing $1 billion in revenue, that's a lot of money. So it's important for us to be a part of that conversation. Now, the second half of that, as a business owner, you have an opportunity I look at this in a number of ways. For one, me getting to come back to my home and open a business, I look at the opportunity for economic empowerment in my community. And that's even starting from the bottom. Our lowest paying jobs that we have for our entry level cannabis advisors start off at $20 an hour. So when you look at what people are paying in similar roles in this industry and both outside this industry, I know that it's a lot higher. But I want to give our people, it's like, if I'm going to have it, it's the responsibility for me to give back. People deserve well-paying wages to be able to live for where they work. It starts with that. Some of the other things that we're doing is, like, personally, I have a partnership with the New Jersey Reentry Corporation, and not only are we hiring employees from there, but we're also giving 1% of our revenue back to them to support returning citizens, people that are coming home that need a way. Because again, when you look at our communities, how many, especially as a black man, I can't think of how many folks that I grew up with that didn't get the opportunities where I was or ended up incarcerated, and I know how tough that is. So we want to be able to support people whether it's cannabis or not. That's something that's important to me. But it could be small things, man. I was blessed to just give back to the UN recreation where I played basketball, growing up. It's small stuff like buying stuff for the score tape, just different things like that you can give back, because again, that money going back now impacting and helping my community. There's, like I said, I think that there's a number of ways that we can be creative, whether it's partnering with organizations to give back money, whether we're talking about giving good paying jobs, whether we're talking about, supporting charitable organizations and charitable funding. I think some of the other things that's important to do is, for us as cannabis business owners, is also to support advocacy with our dollars. So when we look at these different organizations, like Shanita and I both mentioned, the Minority Cannabis Business Association. That's an organization that represents minority business owners all across the country. So how can we strengthen how can we strengthen our efforts is through donating to organizations like that. But also, for me, as a person that's socially conscious, I think it's important to look at all of our black organizations and how can I take my money to help fund that positive causes. And so, again, cooperative economics is a long-reaching theme, right? And the way that we can do that is also through collaboration with each other. When we have opportunities to build wealth together, build business together, do business together, we should also do that, because I think if we have this scarcity mindset where there's a pie. Yes, I know we don't have that big of a piece of a pie, but if you don't split it, it doesn't help us in the long run, right? Like I could say, if I might not be sitting here if it wasn't for Shanita taking me under her wing 5 years ago, right? And that impact is still ongoing. So I try to give back not only financially, but also pour into other people as we're building our other future leaders, our future business owners, and those things as well. And that's an important part of it, because we need to build and continue the cycle. But also, again, collaborating in business. My brand, Simply Pure, the dispensary that I have, it's not mine. It was founded by my good friend Wanda James. She's the first black dispensary owner in the country, and the dispensary's in Colorado. So again, I looked at it like, how could I help to expand black wealth, not just building something with me, going and helping her to empower and build that brand, and then show that we could do it too, right? Like, we don't have to partner with them, go get their stuff, we could build something with black companies and black collaboration and be something strong and take over. And I hope that that's a model that more of us will follow.
Absolutely.
So those were kind of I try to do it. And like I said, I'm building it as I fly, so I just try to do what I think is the right thing from people I've learned and, what I think. So hopefully we can, follow those type of things.
I believe in you, and I'm excited, and I'm going to shop for it with you.
Hey,
And
Jersey.
yes, absolutely. Yes, we have limited time left. I don't know where Kevin went, but he usually gives me a little symbol. So I'm just going to go until he does that to me. But no, I have something I want to put out there in general, because I want to leave with something positive for people to have a takeaway of feeling motivated, of feeling aware, conscious, and when they go and speak to somebody else, they have something effective to say and impactful. Having an eclectic approach, this question can go in many ways. And I would like to hear from each of you in some capacity. What are some examples of successful cannabis reform initiatives in other countries who are a lot more advanced than us? And how might these models inform efforts to reform cannabis laws in the United States and elsewhere?
Well, I mean, one place that comes to mind is Canada. I think 2018 they fully legalized, but what I think that they did really well was put into place a lot of policy that was concerned about public health, compliance, to Shanita's point, testing, accurate testing and processing, and then they did a lot of good educational awareness campaigns that, again, empowered people to go, okay, I'm comfortable with this. So that Canada, that popped out. I like Canada. I like Canada because they legalized as a country and were committed to reevaluating the federal policy. So last year, they spent a good portion of the year actually assessing what's working well, what isn't, and what we can do. And folks that hadn't worked together before in the initial legalization effort were now forced to work together because they only got one shot at again, assessing what was going on and then rewriting and course correcting what is their federal law around cannabis. But then I will also look at Thailand because they had some of the most death penalty associated with cannabis. And so to say, hey, this isn't the direction anymore, we need to look at this differently, I think says a lot. And then I think I'll leave it up to you for another country.
Well, I'm not an international policy expert, but I think one of the exciting things, and that's what that's what I was about to say. That's probably the country that I'm watching the closest is seeing Ghana move to legalize cannabis, especially because my dad's talking about trying to move over there. He spent some time there last year, but I've had conversations with people there, and I'm hopeful to dive in and learn about it. Also, I'll say when you look at federally legalizing cannabis, it creates opportunities for international trade, and many companies are doing that, and that expands economic opportunities. So I think that not only federally descheduling or legalizing cannabis here is the opportunity to stop locking people up and it be federally legal, but it unlocks international trade opportunities as well.
Absolutely, because Canada and Jamaica are doing it. So I want to say thank you from just every part of me. I'm thankful and I'm glad and I'm happy to see you. Thank you, Kevin and Brady, for allowing us to have this panel. We're going to close this out. At some point, I'm sure Kevin will allow for some Q&A. If you guys are hanging around or at the networking mixer this evening, you guys can engage and then also follow them on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you.